Okay, how did the Rollin 60's become probably the most famous outside of LA of the LA street gangs, and why were they so feared? Where did this reputation initially come from? It's also kind of a scared straight for wanting to join a gang. So it's tied in even now with what's going on with this Big U case. You may have heard this name Eddie Boy, and 600 had Eddie Boy on his channel, and Eddie Boy's been going to Big U's court dates, and there's this thing between Eddie Boy and Big U, but it's kind of unclear to figure out. At first, it seemed like they were saying Big U somehow told on Eddie Boy. Big U did 13 years for robbing an undercover LA County sheriff. He thought they were going to buy a bunch of cocaine, and Big U pulled a gun and did a robbery instead back in like 91 or 2. He got like 22 years. California, you do like half your time, your first offense. So he did about 13 years. I'm not sure if Eddie Boy was on that case. I think he was. I'm not sure. But he did 17 years for something. But Eddie Boy's, and I'm put a link to his channel, he tells all these stories. He goes by a Muslim name now, and he's not a gang member. But Eddie Boy has a brother, Little Eddie Boy. Little Eddie Boy has been in prison for 37 years, and Eddie Boy says that his goal in talking on YouTube is to try to get his brother released. Eric Dix is his name. And so back in so there were two crimes that really frightened the city of LA and made the national news. And of course the Olympics happened in '84. So that was when you first heard about people dressed in blue and red, gangs fighting in LA. It was the lead up to the Olympics. But in 1984, in September, there was a crime that really frightened the city of LA. That was the Little Fee case. I did a long story on that. You can watch that. But Little Fee and some other Rollin 60's, as according to the court theory of what they were convicted of, were paid to go execute a 21-year-old girl who was in a wheelchair. She had gotten put in a wheelchair because in '83, maybe on her 21st birthday, she was at a bar somewhere else in South LA, I think on Vermont Avenue, that was owned possibly by this black older gangster type guy. Some people got to arguing in there. There was a shot fired. It had nothing to do with her, but it hit her, put her in a wheelchair. The bar owned by the gangster didn't have any insurance. This girl is going to be in a wheelchair. You need the money to be taken care of. That's why businesses are supposed to have insurance, because stuff can happen, especially bars, but insurance is expensive. So the evidence, now none of these guys ever told on him, but Little Fee and the other co-defendants were supposedly paid, well, they were convicted of it, paid $60,000 to go and kill her, but the address was written down wrong. And they went like maybe a couple doors down to the family of football player Kermit Alexander. They killed like Kermit Alexander, who was an NFL player, who was from LA, from Watts, 51-year-old mother, maybe his sister, and 2 under 18-year-old nephews. So 4 innocent people gunned down. This is the biggest fear, back when crime was starting to kick in everywhere really bad in the 80s, of like not just crime but strangers being killed, young guys coming in and killing families seemingly for no reason. So they accidentally did this quadruple homicide. And then the following year is when the situation with Eddie Boy's little brother, Little Eddie Boy, and the Rollin 60's happened, where there's a guy named 8 Trays named Joker who's out. He does interviews. He talks about it. You can watch his interviews. Street TV. Alex Alonso interviewed him extensively, so you can watch those. But long story short, he bumps into a guy named Mumbles, who's a Rollin 60 at a liquor store around Florence and Normandy, which is where the '92 riot started as well. That's dead in the middle of South Central, the west side of South Central there. And so Joker ends up killing Mumbles. Mumbles was a very, I guess, popular, well-liked gang member. A little secret with gangs, just like anything in life. Some people are liked better than others. Some gang members get killed and nobody does anything about it, but Mumbles was one of those guys. People wanted revenge. So somebody goes over looking for Joker. Of course, is hiding out after he kills Mumbles. He's laying low. So days are passing. Nobody's outside in either neighborhood. They know there's going to be retaliation. Somebody goes to the home where Joker lives, the apartment with his parents. Joker ain't there. Whoever, and little Eddie Boy's one of the ones convicted, but his brother says he didn't do it. But so whoever it was knocks on the door. The 54-year-old mother and like the maybe 17-year-old or 15-year-old little brother of Joker are there, and they're executed. So here you have another homicide that makes the national news with Rollin 60's as the culprits of killing, again, a woman, a 54-year-old woman, and a 15-year-old that, yeah, they're related to a gang member, but, I mean, they're, again, innocent victims. So in the space of, so this was early 86, in about 18 months, you have 6 innocent family members gunned down in their own homes by Rollin 60's members. So this created this air of extreme terror of the Rollin 60's that the city of LA had, and I assume that's what really made their reputation, and I'm sure many other things went on, but those 2 particular incidents. So what happened now, it's really hard to know the truth. Like, another YouTuber just put out that Larry Hoover's a snitch paperwork based on a newspaper article, which is just quoting some police officers saying that Larry Hoover said somebody shot him. Newspaper articles, like, I use newspaper articles, but I'll use a bunch of newspaper articles in conjunction with other stuff because the media generally gets their information from the police, and the police have an agenda. They plant stories, or not necessarily lying. They might put out what they think is true, and it becomes kind of gospel because it gets, especially in the past when newspapers were a big deal. Now you see it with social media, something comes out and gets passed around, and then people assume that it's true. But this case with the homicide of Joker's mother and little brother, so they had the Rollin 60's were suspects, but they had no evidence, any good evidence. So they're rousting Rollin 60's, they're bringing people in. According to Big Eddie Boy, different people are giving information and etc., which wouldn't be a surprise, because those type of crimes, the police are going to beat you up. They're going to make you say something, whether it's true or not. So initially, so the break in the case, they get a call, the police, and it's a guy that says, I saw 3 guys come out of the house, I can identify him. But this guy who makes the call is a young guy who's himself knows that he's wanted for being a USC grapist. He had committed, 15 grapes around the USC campus. He was breaking in houses. I don't know if it was all students or it was just in the neighborhood over there, because back then that neighborhood, it's kind of gentrified now. The campus has expanded, but that was prime gang area. You had the Harpies, you had the Rollin 30's, the 20's, and various gangs around the USC campus, the Rollin 40's. So it's this wanted USC grapist calls in and says he was at a payphone across the street from Joker's family's house, and he saw 3 guys come out. So little Eddie Boy, and a guy named, I think, Mad Ronald, who just was a well-loved Rollin 60, who was killed recently as like a 60-year-old man. Again, scared straight. This gang stuff is serious. He says so little Eddie Boy and Mad Ronald get picked up, but there's a DA reject. The DA won't charge him. Maybe this was before the Grapist called it, not sure. But either way, they get brought in. They no real evidence. They get let go. And then you have this break with this guy calls in. And now they bring in Little Eddie Boy and Petey Whack. Petey Whack was one of the big well-known names said to be involved in a lot of stuff. You can see Petey Whack. He was free for about a year or two in the early 2000s. He was on that Seawalk, It's a Way of Life documentary that I think Keita Rock put together. It was another famous Rollin 60 who was doing life for a very long stretch in Arizona. I think I was told for murking some Mexicans and a drug deal or something. Not sure if that's exactly the truth, but Keita Rock, I'm pretty sure, is locked up in Arizona doing life or equivalent to life. And so Petey Whack and Little Eddie Boy. Now, Eddie Boy and Little Eddie Boy had moved over to the Rollin 60's from Carson. Eddie Boy was a little older. I guess he was doing whatever and had established himself as a reputable, or at least at the time. Little Eddie Boy was in the gang, but didn't really want to be in the gang. This was in the era when the LA gangs were, because this even happened at a high school. I went to the Magnet High School downtown because I scored into it, but at my neighborhood high school, Mumford, I know people went there. Some Rollin 60's from LA were running around Mumford just punching people and saying, you're in the Rollin 60's. And supposedly that would go on somewhat in that mid-'80s when crack was coming out. The gangs were all trying to grow. It wasn't like now where you got to go and ask and get put on or whatever goes on. They would, if you lived in the neighborhood, they might just beat you up and say you're in the gang. And I think maybe that's what happened to Little Eddie Boy, or it was just easier to get in the gangs. But either way, Little Eddie Boy ends up, and according to Big Eddie Boy, the one who's free, the older one who has the YouTube channel, someone else who everyone knows who it was, he doesn't say who it was. He says he was a private investigator and it's all going to come out. Some other Rollin 60, several other Rollin 60s. He says it wasn't Petey Whack or his little brother. That it was some other guys. Some are dead, some are alive. And that Eddie Boy, Little Eddie Boy, because he was new to the neighborhood and whoever did it was more well-liked or something, and they basically, some of the 60s that were telling or whoever, swapped out Little Eddie Boy and Petey Whack for whoever it was. Little Eddie Boy and Petey Whack take separate trials. Petey Whack ends up getting a hung jury. Because, again, there was not a lot of good evidence. It was mainly, I think, this USC grapist who cut a sweet deal. And, of course, do people want to believe someone who's getting out of, I don't know if that guy got a bunch of time or some time or what, but sure, he must have got some time. Is he a believable witness? So Petey Whack got a hung jury, and then they said, well, we'll let you plead guilty. Now, this is infamous. This is one of those crimes, front page of the paper. It's national news. We'll let you plead guilty to 24 years, which is a great deal in a situation like that, frankly. So he takes it. And so he does from like 87 or so to 01. So he does about 15 years or something like that. He gets out. He's out for about 2 years. He gets caught with the pistol. Some say it was then he was doing a carjacking. Whatever the case might be, they strike him. So Petey Whack has been back in jail. And Eddie Boy, Big Eddie Boy, has stories about Petey Whack in prison. I don't know if they're true or not. You can watch them on his channel. I won't repeat them. But so Petey Whack gets struck out. But Little Eddie Boy, again, they had a different trial. He gets found guilty, I guess, based primarily on, I think one of his friends said he told him that he had the same kind of rifle that was used in the homicide. No one was caught with the rifle. There was no murder weapon. And this grapist. Maybe Eddie Boy's not describing all the evidence properly. I wouldn't know. Maybe there's other evidence. Maybe I think there's also was other supposedly informants from the neighborhood that didn't get on the stand. Either way, he's adamant about Eddie Boy's innocent. Joker had a sad life. Joker, who killed Mumbles and started it all, he did about 37 years. He just got out. He lost his little brother and mother due to his actions. he's certainly not promoting gang activity now. Again, you can watch his interviews on Kev Mac or Street TV. Not Kev Mac, Street TV. Maybe he went on Kev Mac too, not sure. So if you're interested in this, I think between Street TV and Kev Mac, you can probably watch more interviews about all this. But that's the general overview. But that's probably why the Rollin 60s starting the 80s got so feared. They had these two really infamous cases involving innocent people. And yeah, Petey, not a good end for any of them. Petey Wack was only free for a couple years. Little Eddie Boy's still in 37 years. Joker did about 35, 37 years, whatever, 32 years. He just got out a couple years ago. So not a good outcome. But these are the names that everyone shouts out and references as if, you know, they're heroes, but they had to give up their whole life to have these well-known names in the street. But Eddie Boy has a lot of animosity for Big U. He says Big U's name is in his little brother's paperwork. I don't know necessarily like per se snitching, but just he says in the paperwork. What does that mean? I don't know. That's for all of those guys to figure out. Big U is in custody. Big U may never be coming home. So events that happened all those 40 years ago. Little Fee, of course, from the Kermit Alexander case. He's locked up. He's on, well, he was on, is he on death row? Yeah, I think he's on death row. Probably none of them are going to get out. So the people some of the main people whose name made Rollin 60s so feared have been locked up that whole time. So quite a sacrifice to make. So go check out, if you're interested, Eddie Boy's channel, Street TV, and that's just the tale, a little bit of it, of little Eddie Boy, who's still in prison for killing Joker's mother and little brother, and his big brother Eddie Boy says he definitely didn't do it, and that Petey Wack won't sign any affidavit. Well, it's a little confusing, because if Petey Wack didn't do it, how could he sign an affidavit? That would be him admitting that he did it. But he already served his time for it. But I guess Petey Wack feels like if he says little Eddie Boy didn't do it, they'll force him to say, well, who did do it? Or it'll be a worthless affidavit if he doesn't say, well, if you did it, who was with you? And if that person's alive, well, then that's a problem. So who knows? So watch Joker and Eddie interviews and Eddie Boy's channel, link below. Al Prophet American Dope.